Welcome to Head to Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Markham. This bi-weekly podcast is created to be a safe space to admit what we truly believe in our hearts. And many of us, when we take the time to truly examine ourselves, will find some sort of shame, fear, or lies hiding in there. And it is never God's will for us to stay in bondage to those. It's His truth that sets us free from them. But there's a huge difference between having biblical knowledge floating around in our heads and actually believing that it's true. Until God's truth makes its way into our hearts, nothing changes. We'll be doing a mix of solo episodes and interviews with friends who have experienced the freedom that comes when head knowledge becomes heart knowledge. The truth will set you free so you can walk every day in the freedom God desires for you. It's time to let go of shame, fear, and lies. Those aren't yours to carry. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Head to Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Markham. Today is a solo episode, and lately I've been recording solo episodes with myself and another friend, but that friend is interviewing me. But today it is only me and only you, dear listener, just you and I. Okay, so the topic we're going to be diving in today is about consent. So here's the thing. I felt the Lord really prompt me to make an episode about consent. I find that this topic gets completely skipped when couples are engaged and preparing for marriage, and maybe it isn't talked about in premarital counseling at all. Or sometimes it's lumped into the communication portion of premarital counseling, and you never really mention it, but you just figure, we talked about how we communicate with each other, so that basically covers it. So I wanted to make an episode about this. I felt the Lord prompt me to do it. And also, it is a little sad how I have to make an episode about this. It's kind of sad because consent is honestly the bare minimum of good relationship. It's the absolute bare minimum to not force anyone to do anything and to communicate well. So of course, since consent is the topic, I do need to give a trigger warning at the beginning of this, because since we're talking about consent, there is also the point where we're going to be talking about a lack of consent. And where there is a lack of consent, there is also assault and rape. So if this episode would be something that's not beneficial for you to listen to, I'm not offended. Go ahead, turn it off. And maybe you can listen to it at a different time, or maybe you're not able to listen to it at all. Totally okay. Just take care of yourself. Do whatever steps you need to take care of your mind and body. So also, before I jump into the meat and potatoes, I need to put a little side on there. Consider this the collard greens. I love collard greens personally. I'll be speaking from a female perspective on this topic. But sexual assault is not something that only affects women. It's very possible for a man to be assaulted or raped as well. So I'm not making this episode talking about him as the perpetrator and he did this and a man did this. I'm not saying only that. I know it goes both ways. I'm just only speaking in female terms because I'm a woman and this podcast is mostly for women, and I have a very small percentage of male listeners. But to the 85% of listeners who are female, I'll be speaking from a female perspective, but I know very well that this affects men as well. So let's jump into it, shall we? I needed to make an episode about this because if you don't have no as an option, then your yes means nothing. Truly. Your yes would mean nothing if your no doesn't mean anything either. But I don't know if you've noticed this, dear listener, but there is a lack of conversation about consent. And if you've grown up in church and decided that you're going to not have sex until marriage, maybe you've heard this conversation even less than the person who has not grown up in church. And maybe that's due to some lies. Now, for Christian couples who are engaged, sometimes there can feel like this underlying sense of, we're going to be married, so it will always or almost always want to have sex. So there really just isn't a need to discuss consent. Like, I give my consent already, But that isn't really true. That is a lie. The truth is, even if you have the healthiest dating relationship or the healthiest marriage, you still need to talk about consent because it's way more than just a yes or no one time. It's about how you say no and how you say yes and how your partner reacts when you say no. If you're engaged or prepping to be married, you need to talk about how would you like me to turn down sex? If there's a time when I just don't want to, how can I say it that it won't hurt your feelings? How would you like me to say it so it's kind? And then also you can flip it on your partner to say, when you turn down sex, how do you want me to react? Okay, here's what I'll do. Here's the plan. Because it is so much more than just a one-time yes or no. If you're attaching your life to this person, you're going to go through many ups and downs with them. You're going to have headaches. You're going to be sick. You may have children and go through postpartum. There are going to be some times when you just don't want to have sex. And you probably know that, but if you do know that and you'd say, of course, that makes sense. That's kind of a no-brainer. Then you will see why you do need to talk about consent ahead of time. And if you're already married, it's not too late. Don't worry. I'm not saying if you didn't talk about it while you were engaged that it's over and you can never have this conversation. It's probably going to be a continual conversation as life changes. So it's not too late. Go ahead and bring up that conversation now. Another common lie that I've heard, and it's very, very sad, is that sometimes Christian women will feel, well, if I say no to sex too often, it will inevitably drive my husband into some sort of sexual sin, like pornography or maybe even having an affair. No, my dear listener, I just break that lie off of you in the name of Jesus. That is completely untrue. If the wife is turning down sex really often, then there's probably something else going on as to why she doesn't want to have sex, okay? To demand having sex for the sake of the relationship is ungodly and sinful. When is demanding something a godly thing to do? So ask why. If you are the wife and you just never feel like having sex and you feel terrible about it, well, then ask yourself why. I bet it's not because you don't enjoy doing fun things. That's probably not the reason. Ask why. Are you exhausted all the time? Are you and your husband not communicating well? You don't feel like you're on the same page. Are you feeling insecure about your body? Are you the partner who just has a lower desire? Is sex not fun for you? If it's always a no, then it's something going on, okay? Because if sex is something that is fun, enjoyable, and connecting for both partners, then I shouldn't have to convince you to want to do it, right? So if it's always a no, then get to the real reason why it's a no and deal with that. And if your husband has an affair and looks at porn or engages in any sexual sin of any type, it is due to his lack of self-control and him trying to get the ache of his heart fulfilled through an on-demand type of rush. It is him giving the desire of his heart, and I don't mean sex. Sex is not the desire of his heart because sex is never just about sex. Okay, we all have very real needs as a human that are to be seen, known, and loved just as we are. It's called intimacy. So it is him giving the desire for intimacy of connection, validation, security to a thing or a person instead of God. Not instead of you, because giving you as his wife all the questions of his heart and seeking validation only from you, connection only from you, security only from you is not healthy. That would not be the right answer. He has to get those core fundamental questions answered by God. That will keep him from sinning. It keeps all of us from sinning when we take those questions and get that validation from the Lord, okay? So taking those and giving them to you is not the right answer. That is not going to keep him from sin. God is the one who keeps him from sin. The Holy Spirit is the one who gives him the fruit of self-control. And if your husband stumbled into anything like that, you cannot take the blame and put it on yourself. Sister, you will never get anywhere with that mindset. Also, last lie that I'll bring up that I've seen is what Hollywood teaches us. In every Hollywood movie or every TV show, okay, I'm not going to say every, but a lot of them, a lot of Hollywood movies, a lot of Hollywood TV shows, strangers basically jump each other. I don't know if you've noticed that, but Hollywood teaches you nothing about healthy consent whatsoever. Even when there's a married couple who has a good relationship in many movies and TV shows, it's not realistic. And so Hollywood's never going to show you a really healthy conversation about consent, whether it's in dating or strangers or engaged or married. It's not going to show you a healthy conversation. So you cannot base any of your expectations for relationships off of what you have seen in movies or TV shows. You have to get this from God and from His Word. You need to start this conversation with the Word of God. And I'm going to share the main verse that I have seen taken out of context for this conversation. The main verse that I have seen taken out of context about this conversation around consent is 1 Corinthians 7 verse 5, okay? This verse is cherry picked, my bad. This verse is cherry picked out of Scripture and used against people, and it's incredibly heartbreaking. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 5 says, "Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." This is Paul talking to married couples. When you cherry pick this verse out of the whole chapter and just read this, it can really be weaponized into someone demanding sex out of their spouse, and it's completely unhealthy. So this may sound like, okay, well, you have to say yes every time your partner wants to be intimate because, the only time that it's appropriate to decline sex would be if you both have chosen to devote yourselves to prayer. But don't make that too long. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy and you're not going to have any self-control. That's what happens when we cherry pick verses. Now I'm going to start from 1 Corinthians 7 verse 1. Okay, we're not starting at verse 5. I'm going to start from verse 1 and then we're going to see what Paul really meant when he wrote this. Verse 1 starts, "Now for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. But since there is no such immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. And in the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer, and then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Verse 6, pay attention. "I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that." Okay, I just stopped at verse 7. Listen, when we just pluck verse 5 out of that chapter, it will not convey the message that Paul intended. When you add verse 6, literally just verse 6, it says, "I say this as a concession, not as a command." Okay, so Paul, as a single man, a single missionary, recognizes that what he is saying here is not a command from God, that you have to, just for a time of prayer, say no to sex and then, resume very quickly afterwards. He's saying this is not a command. And when we just cherry pick this verse out of it, it sounds like a command that you have no choice. And it's just not true. And I love how verse 3 and 4 really emphasizes that there is consent between both the husband and a wife. It does not stop and just say the wife's body also belongs to her husband. It says in the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. So God is very much for consent. He is not at all saying, you owe this. You absolutely owe this to your spouse. And even if you just want to fast forward in 1 Corinthians and go straight to 1 Corinthians 13, which is about what love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. If you just want to skip ahead in the book of 1 Corinthians, you will see that love is not meant to be self-seeking whatsoever. And so we cannot just take one verse and say, you owe sex to your spouse at all times. That's completely anti-biblical. Okay, so let's say that you're like, Jenny, I'm with you. I completely agree. But if I'm just not up to having sex, how can I say no kindly? How can I say no in a way that isn't mean or feels like rejection? Well, there are several ways. You can seriously just say, no, not tonight, period. That's a complete sentence. You could also try the pivot. Let's say you're in a healthy, loving marriage. You can try pivoting. You say your spouse wants to have sex, but you're not feeling up to it at all. You could say, I'm not up to having sex tonight, but I would like to spend time with you. Could we cuddle on the couch instead? Pivot it from this activity to something that's more compromising and meets in the middle. Or you could say, I've been feeling really stressed recently and haven't been in the right space of mind for sex. Instead, could we plan on it this weekend and push it farther out? Now, what if you're the spouse that kind of takes a no personally and feels like your spouse is rejecting you when they say no? I want to assure you that your spouse's libido has nothing to do with your attractiveness and has nothing to do with their love for you. They're not saying, I don't love you. They're just saying, I'm not in the mood to do this activity with you right now. So this doesn't have to be something personal. It's something that you feel is damaging to your marriage. There is a place to express when you do miss your spouse or have concerns for your marriage. So it would sound like, that's okay that you're not up to having sex right now, but I've noticed that you haven't wanted to a lot recently, and I miss you. I want to connect with you. Is there anything wrong, or is there something I could do to help you get in the mood? That's a way to express you're missing your spouse, you have concerns for your marriage, without pressuring them into doing anything. So this is not something you have to take as a rejection. And maybe you're saying this and you're like, wow, my husband has to listen to this. Yes, please listen to this episode together so that you guys can get on the same page about how to say no in a way that doesn't feel personal or feel mean or like you're rejecting them. So those two things I just explained are really when you're in a loving, safe marriage. But the other question, and a listener question that was sent in to me, is what if your spouse does not take no well? This is something I am so sad that I have to address because this shouldn't be the case. But unfortunately, there is such a thing as marital rape. And listen to me, because this is really important. Abuse is not only when you're getting pinned down violently, it also can be something like coercion, which is the practice of persuading someone to do something by force or by threats. So let's say you say no to sex and then you suddenly get the silent treatment for like a week. Or your spouse says, okay, you don't want to have sex with me? Well, fine. Then I won't blank, whatever it may be. I won't come home tomorrow. I won't let you use my money, etc. Those are also forms of abuse, and you should not have to put up with that. And if your marriage is unsafe, you can get help. So I'm just going to say the United States hotline for domestic abuse, it's 800-799-7233. That is the hotline. And if for some reason you're like, I don't know, should I call the hotline? Maybe this isn't qualifying. Maybe I should. If you're debating that in your mind, then there's probably a reason. I'll just say that. And if you're someone who has experienced abuse in the past, I hope that you can take this as an encouragement to just learn a little something about some trauma. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It's not just fight or flight. That's what we hear a lot, right? We hear, yeah, I was in fight or flight mode. But there's actually 4 trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I want to talk about freeze for a second. So freeze is a lot like a possum when it's not dead, but it's playing dead, right? The possum's body is in shock and it's literally preparing to die when it plays dead. It's saying, it's completely unsafe here. I have to get out of here, but my body is frozen and is preparing to die. A lot of abuse survivors are able to look back and heal from their trauma when they realize that freeze is a trauma response. Because let's say something terrible happened to you and you think, why didn't I even do anything? I didn't want that to happen, but it feels like I let that happen. Why did I just stay there? Why didn't I say anything? Why did I just sit there? But freeze is a trauma response. So once you understand that, you're able to heal. Because for years you could be mad at yourself thinking, why didn't I do anything? But freeze is a trauma response just like fight or flight or fawn. So don't get angry at yourself. Just recognize and say, okay, yeah, I wasn't being passive. I didn't want that to happen. This was a trauma response. So it's something you can heal from if that has happened to you in the past. To sum it all up, I don't think that this episode is only concerning married people or only concerning people who are going to get married very, very soon. If you're dating, take this to heart. If you're dating, discern the character of your boyfriend. What does he do when he gets angry? Does he struggle with pornography? If he does struggle, is he getting help? Does he have entitlement in any area of his life? Does he respect your boundaries or does he push them really often? Those are great questions to ask yourself to prevent something very unhealthy in the future. If you're engaged, you need to talk about consent before you get married. And it will probably be a continual conversation as you grow together in marriage. And then if you're married, go ahead and talk about it. Why not? Talk about it if you haven't before, or just revisit the conversation if it needs some updating. Say, how would you like me to decline sex if I'm not feeling up to it? So that you guys can get on the same page and no one's feelings are hurt. And if you're married and find yourself in a relationship that includes coercion or even marital rape, you gotta get help. And I included the hotline in the US for domestic abuse in this episode. It will also be in the show notes. So thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. I needed to make it. I needed to do it. I needed to bite the bullet and just talk about this topic that is necessary and is the bare minimum for a healthy relationship. So my prayer is that it helped you greatly, and thank you for listening. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Head to Heart Podcast. It's a joy to record them and a joy to have you listen. Since you're a dedicated listener and made it to the very end of the episode, I have 2 gifts for you. One is that I have a free resource linked in the show notes for you. It's a resource created to help you take the truth you've learned either in this episode or in a previous one and apply it to your life. The second gift I have for you is access to my seasonal playlists. Every season, summer, fall, winter, spring, I create a regular playlist and a worship playlist that will be ongoing throughout the season. And you'll be able to follow it on Spotify if you need some good boogie tunes. Because let's be honest, in another life, I would have been a DJ. So you now have full access to meet all your seasonal music needs in the show notes. As always, I love hearing from you. So follow me on Instagram and send me a DM of how this episode impacted you. The handle is headtoheart_podcast. And if you would be so kind, leave a 5-star rating and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the website. By doing this, you'll help me get more amazing guests on the show in the future. I'll be releasing new episodes to you every other Friday, so stay tuned and thanks for joining us.